And I'm live here on the MMA, what we're going to be calling, I guess, the MMA Sucka Q&A hour. Once I come up with a better title, we will use that. But for now, this is the MMA Sucka Q&A hour. My name is James Lynch. If this is the first time you're tuning in here, I am going to be doing this every month on MMA Sucka. Basically just answering your questions, anything MMA related. I'm happy to do this. This is going to be a little bit more casual and relaxed than the MMA industry podcast, which I do over on Fightful. That's a bit more buttoned up. Like today, I'm going to be, wearing, there's no dress code here, so I'll be wearing a, today I'm wearing this cool Excite Bike shirt here. If you guys are watching on the video chat, definitely don't have a dress code here. I just basically want to make this a conversation and make this interactive. And I'll always get asked questions all the time, so I'm happy to have a platform where I can do this every month. And on the MMA industry podcast over on Fightful, that's mainly just going to be guests, because I was getting a lot of people saying, hey, can you do another solo Q&A podcast? So thanks big time to Jeremy Brand over at MMA Sucka. He is giving me this opportunity. So every month, we don't know exactly when, but I'll be letting everyone know over social media, that I'll be doing this. We're going to be doing it for an hour every month and hopefully answer all the questions you may ask. And before we get into this, I'll just give you a quick backstory if you guys aren't familiar with me, if this is the first time you're tuning in. I am a mixed martial arts journalist. I do this full time and I work for a bunch of different outlets. And if I was to name all of them, we would be here all day, but sort of some of the main ones: Flow Combat, Fightful, MMA Oddsbreaker, Fansided, Sports Illustrated MMA, My MMA News, MMA News. Am I missing any? And then obviously MMA Sucka here. I'll be doing the chats on here as well. So I want to make this informative. This isn't about me just rambling on and talking about things. I want to, be helpful. People are out there and they have questions and things of that nature. So that's sort of the reason I've decided to do this. And we're going to get into some questions right now. Let me just check the chat here, see if we got any off the bat. I'm going to write something real quick in here. Multitasking is not my best thing. So got any questions? I will answer them here. Perfect. So we'll get to that. But we did get a lot of questions on Twitter. So we'll start there first, and then we'll kind of figure out our way throughout the rest of this episode here. First question comes to us from a good buddy of mine, Douglas Geller. You can follow Douglas on Twitter at Douglas Geller27, and he contributes for MMA Today. He's a great guy. And Douglas, if you're watching this, I will see you in a few weeks. I'm going to be going to Brooklyn for UFC 223, covering that event. I'll talk about that a bit at the end, what I'll be doing for that. But Douglas asks, what parts of MMA are the least covered? And if you had time, is there any part of MMA you'd like to cover? So I think regional MMA, anyone that follows me on Twitter or on social media in general, I preach a lot of, regional MMA, and there's a lot of outlets who are certainly doing that, but I still think there's a lot more to be covered. As far as all the promotions, there's just so many promotions in North America. And then you've got, obviously outside of North America too, you have all these other promotions. And I feel like a lot of people still are focused on UFC and Bellator, and it has to be covered. I understand that. I get that. But, there are really good prospects out there. There are really good shows out there that aren't the UFC and Bellator, and I'd like to see that covered a little bit more. I think women's MMA still doesn't get enough coverage. It's nice to see, bigger outlets like MMA Fighting do stories on Invicta fighters as well. But, there's other promotions that have women's MMA fights, and those need to get exposures as well. It needs to get more exposure, I should say, as well. So those are some things to kind of look into as well. But I think there's lots of stuff that could be covered. And if you're watching this and you're starting out, I would highly recommend, wherever you live, find if there's any local MMA going on around you. I did a whole video on this, actually. If you go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/LynchOnSports, I really think there's areas of MMA that need to be covered more. As someone who tries to keep track of sort of everything that happens in North America, I'm often looking for results, and you would not believe how tough it is to find results for local shows. A lot of times my go-to is anyone tweeting about this. So I'll have to go do a quick Twitter search of the fighter's name, and oftentimes, you don't find stuff there. So my next step is going to Facebook. I will see if the promotion has the results on their Facebook page. Oftentimes they don't. Sometimes I'll have to go as far as, I do this Veteran Watch column on MMA Oddsbreaker, where I kind of talk about notable veterans that are competing outside the UFC. A lot of times I'll have to go to the fighter's personal Facebook page to find out if they won. Sometimes it's like I'll see a post where it's like, someone like, oh, I got the win, it was a good knockout. So it's like, okay, good. So I know this guy won. So now I got to dig a little bit deeper to figure out the actual result. But no, I think that there definitely needs to be more live tweeting and just results in general for local MMA. Flow Combat, who I I work for, they do a great job of it. There's Bluegrass MMA, MMA Today does some good work. There's lots of outlets that are doing it, but there still needs to be more. There's just so many shows on across North America and in the world. So I mean, to kind of answer Doug's question in sort of the short form, I just think that the regional stuff needs to get more coverage, because everyone automatically wants to cover the bigger promotions there. And he asks, is there another part of MMA that you would like to cover? I mean, if I had time, I'd like to go even deeper in sort of the prospect pool stuff and maybe cover more amateur stuff. Maybe cover more kickboxing and boxing would be cool. But since you asked MMA, so that's not boxing, kickboxing, I guess that doesn't really count. But yeah, maybe more amateur stuff. But again, I just don't have time. I mean, I interview enough people as it is. The odd time I'll get an amateur fighter in there and sort of get some questions in, but oftentimes it's just too difficult to go and try and take care of that stuff as far as getting interviews and things of that nature. So hope I answered your question, Doug. Hopefully we can meet up for beers. We will definitely coordinate with that come Brooklyn time, UFC 223. That, of course, is on April 7th. I've got another question here from Twitter user by the name of TEMU Jin MMA. Timu Jin MMA. I believe that's how you say it. Could be butchering that. My apologies, but you can follow this person at TEMU JIN MMA. He says, with Volkov winning, Hunt and Beast calling out Ngannou, Tuvesa gaining momentum, Kane whispers, what are the fights you would like to see in the heavyweight division while Stipe is busy? Well, the thing is, I mean, Stipe obviously has this fight in July. So, I mean, Volkov, for example, just fought. I know it's March, but I mean, if he wanted to, I guess I see what you're saying, because Stipe is going to fight in July. And then, if he's healthy or not healthy, I mean, he's probably not going to be back maybe until end of year, right? Because that's sort of how the scheduling works. I mean, I think it's important to see who wins that fight between Curtis Blaydes and Alistair Overeem. I mean, usually when it comes to matchmaking, when there's fights scheduled, it's usually who does sort of the best or who sort of makes the biggest noise, right? Like if Curtis Blaydes, not saying he'll do this. In fact, I don't think he'll knock out Alistair Overeem, but let's say he goes out there and knocks out Overeem. I mean, you pretty much have to put Blaydes next in line for the title, right? If Blaydes wins a decision, which is entirely possible, then, maybe you give him someone in between before giving him that title shot. He's still relatively young. So, I mean, you've got Volkov, we've got Curtis Blaydes. I mean, I shouldn't count out Overeem, by the way. Alistair Overeem absolutely could win that fight. If he knocks out Curtis Blaydes, he's back in the mix. I still think he's a couple fights away just because he lost to Ngannou. And then, Kane, Velasquez, who knows what's happening with him at this point. You hope that he's, we hear that he's training and everything, but what does that mean? Is he going to actually be back? Yeah, I mean, it's sort of tough to say. And the other thing is, we have Junior Dos Santos out there. I know he's suspended. When is he going to come back? Ben Rothwell's suspended. When's he going to come back? So I really think you sort of have to see when these sort of fighters are going to come back. It's really going to depend on what sort of happens with like Kane and JDS, because I imagine they'll, those guys will get fights against up and comers. The UFC sort of is in that theme these days with, obviously Tuvesa is actually fighting Arlovsky on the Chicago card. So, I think we'll sort of have to see how that sort of pans out. But all those fights, that you mentioned, or all the fighters that you mentioned there, Derek Lewis, Mark Hunt. I mean, I don't think you can go wrong. I think Mark Hunt at this point, I mean, I'd like to see Hunt fight someone that's not going to knock him out, because I think that guy's taken enough damage as it is. So maybe you give him I don't know who you'd give him at this point, to be honest, who's a non-threatening heavyweight that, isn't going to knock him out. Because I think that's the main thing. I mean, I don't mind Hunt fighting again, but I don't want to see him get knocked out. I don't want it to be a situation, because, I mean, that guy's taken so much damage. I know he's got an iron chin, but I mean, it's not very appealing to see that. So for example, I'm not a fan of Derek Lewis and Mark Hunt. Derek Lewis should fight someone, on the come up. Maybe he fights, like an Overeem, if Overeem gets past Blaydes or something along those lines. Tuvesa, might not get past Arlovsky. We'll see. Arlovsky's surprised a bit in his last couple fights. I mean, Junior Albini, I think people were expecting him to beat him, and he didn't. So we'll sort of see what happens there. But as far as fights, I'm a fan of prospect versus veteran. So whatever that ends up being, as far as, Junior being back, if Junior fights, Volkov, or Junior fights, maybe if Blaydes loses, maybe Junior fights Blaydes. I don't know. I don't really know at this point. It's the division's a bit of a mess right now. And you've got, guys like Tim Johnson who aren't under contract right now. I don't know if he's even going to be back with the UFC. So there's definitely a lot of options there as far as what can happen. But I don't really have a preference. Just if I could stick with sort of a catalyst, it would be prospects versus veterans. So I hope I answered your question there. Next question comes to us from John, my buddy over at MMA Today, who's doing some great interviews, by the way. You can follow John on Twitter. He does a show called Kumite Radio at JKMMA. He had a really good interview with Vince Murdoch, who had a really bad experience with Super Fight League. Highly recommend going to check out that. And John's really, I talked off the top about areas that need to be covered. John is, carrying the torch for international MMA. He's interviewing, a lot of fighters overseas that just aren't getting interviewed by North American media. And it's awesome. I watch his interviews all the time because I learn a lot. And I think that's an area that, I wish I could cover a bit more as well. So he asked me, Reebok boxers or briefs, the UFC wants to know. I guess he's asking if I wear Reebok stuff. I don't wear anything Reebok. Unfortunately, I'm a MeUndies type person. If anyone listens to like Bill Burr or Joe Rogan podcast, they're always promoting that brand. And you pay a lot as a Canadian. I got to say, I actually got dinged by customs last time when I bought some MeUndies underwear. And it was, it was a pain in the ass, but they're the best. I mean, I really do enjoy. I'm actually wearing a pair right now. Won't show you, even though this show's a little bit more casual. It's not that casual where I'm going to show my underwear. So, I nothing Reebok wise for me, but for the, for the fighters or whoever, I guess they're probably wearing the briefs because you got to protect that junk, So what am I going to say? Next question comes to us from Michael Fidel. Hope I'm saying that right, Michael. My apologies if I'm not. You can follow him on Twitter at Michael Fidel. It's Michael, and then Fidel is F-I-E-D-E-L on Twitter, all one word. He says, what's your take on the controversy surrounding the pay concerns of Brad Scott? He didn't miss weight, but only received partial show money. Meanwhile, Hasparat, who's the one who basically got his matchup taken away because of the eye issue, got full pay. What do you think of that situation and what needs to change? Well, it would be great if the fighters had a union and this could be collectively bargained into their contracts and everything else, because I think if you show up and you do everything you're supposed to do as a fighter and you make weight, you should get paid your show money. Absolutely. You're winning money, probably not. I feel for Brad Scott. He did his job. It's not his fault his opponent pulled out. I guess sort of the only consolation is if they like rebooked him really quickly. But even then, I mean, I have a big issue with guys that are not getting paid for making weight. For guys that are making weight, that aren't getting paid. I have a big issue with that. And Hasparat, I mean, let's call it what it is. He's Ali Abdelaziz's manager. Ali does a good job with contracts as far as fighters getting compensation. So and Ali's got a great relationship with the UFC. I mean, he's got like half the roster. I guarantee Ali had something in that contract with Nasrat where it says, hey, listen, no matter what, he's going to get paid. Is it unfair? Absolutely. But it's also the importance of having good management, I guess, in the sense that they can negotiate something like that. So good for Nasrat. Although it is interesting because, Nasrat, he has the eye problem. Again, not his fault, but at the end of the day, it is his fault. It's not his opponent's fault that he, for his opponent can't help that his opponent is got the eye issue and he's out of the fight. But you've got a guy in Nasrat who, is rescheduled right away, it seems. I think he's going to get a fight fairly soon. So, I mean, yeah, it sucks for comparing the two, but I think that at the end of the day, they have to negotiate that somehow in the contracts where it's like, because there's really no transparency. Like, I go back to the John Dodson situation where he refused to fight Pedro Munoz when Munoz came well overweight. And I get that because if you look at Dodson, he is an undersized bantamweight. If Munoz has 5 pounds on him and Munoz is a big 135er, I get him not taking that fight. Some fighters could have taken that fight. They would have lost. And then, all of a sudden you're in sort of this whirlwind. So I kind of understand it from that perspective, but I think there needs to be a standard. I think they need to, I just think it's going to save a lot of headaches with everyone. If you show up, if you make the weight, if you, do what you're supposed to do, you should get paid. That's my opinion on it. So as far as comparing the two situations, I think Nasrat has a good manager, and I think that Brad Scott should get paid. But as of right now, it sounds like he's not. So that's something to consider as well. So we're getting some questions in the chat. I'm going to sort of bounce back and forth here, guys. And again, I appreciate the feedback, especially this being the first episode. We've got Clovis Gullier asked me, what is next for Duquesnoy? Well, let me look at the rankings here. Duquesnoy, he won that fight. I don't agree with the 30-27 scorecard. I thought Terrion Ware won the third round. Actually trying to speak with Terrion Ware this week to get his thoughts. Terrion, just bad luck. I mean, he's got really tough opponents. He's gone 0-3 at the UFC, but fought Cody Stamann. Cody Stamann hasn't lost in the UFC. Fought Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley hasn't lost in the UFC. Now he's got Duquesnoy, and that was a close fight. Still think Duquesnoy won the fight, but, it wasn't a 30-27. In my opinion. So anyhow, Duquesnoy, what is sort of next for him? I'm just looking at his record here. I mean, I think you got to give him the guys that are like a Terrion Ware caliber still. There's nothing about him. I mean, sort of looking at the rankings and everything else, which I'm going to pull up right now. And we were looking here at the man. It's so funny whenever you when you look at the rankings. The UFC's website doesn't come up first. It's always someone else's thing. So I always have to double check. So I'll just go UFC rankings here. Sorry, guys. I hate to stall this a little bit, but here we're on the rankings now. And what do we got here? Man, I'm on the mobile site. How did that happen? Sorry. We're coming up here. Okay, so you've got 1 to 15. Duquesnoy not ranked at the moment. You know what? He's had 2 fights in the UFC. He lost a close fight to Cody Stamann. I thought Stamann won that fight, so no debate there. Maybe you give him like an Eddie Wineland. Maybe you give him a vet. I think you got to still build this guy up because clearly he's got a following. I mean, he was in Bama. He was their, if I'm not mistaken, he was their champion. He was their bantamweight champion. He's 24 years old. UFC has a tendency sometimes with certain fighters to kind of throw them to the wolves. And I think Duquesnoy, the path he's been on, the opponents he's had, I think have been good fights. Even the Stamann fight, which he lost, it still gave us an indication that he can hang with a really tough guy like Cody Stamann because Stamann's looked great. I think the UFC was hoping that Duquesnoy would go out there and get a finish and look really like overly impressive, but that just didn't happen. And I think that there's still some room to grow. I don't think he's the super pro. I mean, do you remember when he came in the UFC, guys and girls who are watching this and people were really just sort of high on the guy and thought he was sort of the next big thing? He hasn't really shown that. I mean, he's won the fights he's supposed to win, but he's not blowing people away. So that's why I don't think you give him, like an upper tier guy, like a guy that's in the top 10, for example. Like I would not give him, like he lost a close fight to Stamann. Maybe like a Thomas Almeida, to be honest, because like Almeida's kind of lost a few now. Who's the better prospect? I mean, Almeida's, I think, shown that he's not a contender. I think at this point he's got some room for improvement, and Duquesnoy should get someone in the top 15. Maybe an Eddie Wineland, maybe a Thomas Almeida or whatever. Stylistically, Almeida always brings a good fight. So you'd be curious to see sort of what happens there. And I think at this point with Almeida, I mean, even though he's not, he's under 30. Actually, how old is Almeida? I should probably do this without talking out of my ass. I think he's had fights where he's sort of tried to get to that next level. Almeida has anyways. He fought Rivera. He lost to Font. Lost to Garbrandt. No shame in that. Almeida, 26. Okay, so he's only 2 years older. Maybe you don't do that fight because then you kill a prospect on the rise. But it's also one of those fights where if they fought, you'd figure out where they sort of fit, right? I don't have an issue necessarily with the fight. Maybe you do Duquesnoy and Wineland, though. That might be the first choice. But if not, I wouldn't mind watching these two sort of throw down. Let me know what you guys think in the chat if you guys are sort of paying attention here. Goldcap says not O'Malley. Well, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, again, you kill a prospect that way. O'Malley, he's another guy that I think has definitely looked good in his fights, but I think you got to still slowly build him up as well. He's a really young guy. He's got an undefeated record. He's a guy that everyone likes. I mean, he's sort of, I won't say he's a star yet, but I know that he's a guy that people really like. I mean, he's got the Snoop Dogg thing, and he's I can even tell you personally, I interviewed Sean even before he was in the UFC. I interviewed him for LFA. I couldn't get an interview with him this time because I think they're starting to see that this guy is only doing selective outlets. I know he's done some stuff with TMZ. So you do sort of a slow build with him as well. But no, I don't want to see Duquesnoy and O'Malley fight because they're still on the rise, in my opinion. So you got to sort of switch it up a little bit there. Clovis also says, what do you think about kickboxers going to MMA? We saw Israel Golkan Saki, and we know Cedric Doumbé, the former Glory champion, plans to fight in the UFC. I like it. I think it's good because for whatever reason, kickboxing has not taken a storm in sort of the North American scene for whatever reason. And I know Glory puts on good events, and I know their promotion does a great job. And to be honest with you, working with them, I've interviewed a few of their fighters. They've been great. I think they're awesome. I think we will see more fighters going that route just because it seems like the UFC has a fan base in North America. And I think that with Glory, it's not as big for whatever reason. I talked to a guy like Michael Stetz, a buddy of mine who covers kickboxing quite extensively. He's actually one of the best journalists out there for that. He can't figure it out either. I think I almost feel like if you want to get people into kickboxing, you got to do like an Ultimate Fighter type show. But to answer your question, I do see more people coming over because I think they see that there's an area where people can become more popular, and also people like the stand-up fighting. So I think it's a welcomed addition to the UFC because they like seeing people go duke it out or whatever. So I'll go back to the chat in a sec, but let's continue here with the questions on Twitter. And we've got John Douglas. Wow, I haven't heard from him in a while, who's a fellow MMA Sucka writer. I'm pretty sure he still writes for the site. He says, what do you think of the Aldo-Stevens matchup and who takes it and why? I love the Aldo-Stevens matchup. It's perfect matchmaking. You've got two guys who are going in opposite directions. You've got Jose Aldo, who has lost 2 in a row to Max Holloway, granted. You know, Max is the best right now at 145. You got him taking on Jeremy Stephens, who at one point it looked like Stephens might have not been done, but possibly been cut. I mean, there was a point in his career where he lost a couple in a row. And again, so I'm not talking out of my ass. I'm going to pull up his record here. Let's see what we got here for Jeremy Stephens. Because I remember he had lost a couple in a row. And since then, he's won like, what, 3 straight, I think? Yeah, he lost. I mean, look at this here. He was 2-5 between 2014 and 2017. He lost to Swanson, lost to Charles Oliveira. He beat Bermudez, although that was kind of a last-minute finish because Bermudez was winning that fight too. Lost to Holloway, no shame in that. Went the distance with him, actually. He beats Barao. Barao's not the same fighter, so whatever. And then he loses to Edgar, and then Renato, the guy who's fighting Calvin Kattar. Don't want to say his last name at the point. I'm going to butcher it. But yeah, he's really turned things around, getting wins over Melendez, Doo Ho Choi, and Josh Emmett. So it's kind of going in 2 different directions. I like this fight because is Aldo, has he lost a step? Or is it the fact that he just fought Max Holloway twice, who's the best featherweight on the planet? We'll find out. Stephens has had a resurgence. You know, I think all the wins he's had are pretty good. Although it's interesting because, you know, I think that the jury's still out on Josh Emmett at this point because he did have the win over Lamas, which was great. But, you know, is he really that good? Or is it just that he caught Lamas and, you know, we don't know. Melendez, I think we can all agree, has kind of lost a step. And, you know, fighters who generally go down a weight class later in their career never do too well. And Doo Ho Choi's a great fighter, but he's a bit reckless sometimes, and he got caught. I'm not taking anything away from Stephens, but we don't really know how I don't know who's going to win this fight, to be honest. But since you asked me and I need to do a pick, I got to go with the hot hand and Jeremy Stephens. I think he's looked great. And, you know, Stephens is 31 years old. He's arguably in the prime of his career. And Aldo, I mean, he's not old, but he's fought a lot of fights. He's also 31. For some reason, I feel like Aldo's older. I guess because he's fought longer. Or has he fought longer? He made his debut in 2004. When did Stephens make his debut? Let's look at that here. 2005. So actually, Aldo has had more fights by like a year. But he certainly he's had, you know, a lot more. Actually, no, they both had a lot of wars. I take that back. My pick is going to be Stephens. I think maybe he wins the decision in this one, but we'll sort of see what happens there because it's, you know, you never know in these fights. I think Aldo, you know, proved, for example, in the Frankie Edgar fight. I mean, people were writing him off after the Conor loss, and then he beats Frankie Edgar, who's still, you know, one of the best. So I don't really know where you go on a situation like that, but I will take someone in, and we got Jeremy Brigham in the chat saying, I think Aldo is still a little bit too much for him. Very well could be. I could be completely wrong. I just, you know, when a guy's on a hot streak and a guy's on a losing streak, usually you got to take the guy on the hot streak, although it's Aldo, man. Aldo's still awesome, and he's very, very, very talented. So, yeah, I'm going to pick Stephens. May regret that later, but right now my initial pick is Stephens. I would imagine, though, if they're looking at the betting line, I think Aldo probably would be the favorite because he's a former champion. Although he's been finished twice, so you never know. I don't know. I'll be curious to see what the line is on that. John Douglas also asked, and by the way, John's Twitter handle, I didn't even plug that there, is DJ John Douglas on Twitter, all one word, so you can go follow him there. He says, who would you like to see Mean Hakeem fight next, and are we too premature with the hype behind him? I will answer the second question first and then match him up after this. I don't think it's too premature with the hype that's behind him because Hakeem was undefeated heading into this fight. He looked good heading into the matchup. He had a win over a UFC vet in Steven Seiler in World Series of Fighting. So, you know, when people say, oh, you know, he's overhyped, I mean, on paper, it looked like he is the real deal. I still think he's a good prospect. I think that he got caught, and I think that he'll come back. It reminded me, and I got to give Flow Combat credit for this because they tweeted this out on Saturday, that it reminded me a bit of the Aaron Pico-Zach Freeman fight where, you know, Pico had all this hype, and then Zach Freeman, kind of a similar sequence where he went out there and submitted Pico. The Duwadu fight reminded me of the same thing, and I'm not taking anything away from Danny Henry, but I think Duwadu can show a lot more than he did in that fight. And the other thing we got to consider here too is Duwadu hadn't fought in over a year. He had a bit of a layoff due to contract stuff. He was trying to get out of his World Series of Fighting contract. When he finally did, he gets signed by the UFC in the fall. And then all of a sudden, you know, it takes him a bit to get booked for a fight. So I'd like to see him take another fight here, see sort of what he's made of, and then see sort of what happens. So I'm not off that bandwagon yet. And he's only 26. So
I think there's some room to grow for Hakeem. As far as what's next for him, I mean, let me look down the UFC featherweight roster right now. UFC featherweight division. Maybe you give him a vet. Because here's the thing. I know the UFC doesn't seem too high on Canada these days. I mean, they haven't booked any events yet. And, they just got rid of Jason Sago, for example, after only losing 2 fights. I think they're kind of going in that direction where they're not putting too much stock into a lot of the Canadian guys. But realistically, Hakeem is, one of the prospects they should be building on along with Jeremy Kennedy, because all the other guys they have in the division really are, older, and it's a tougher sell as far as some of the up and comers. But let's look at the featherweight division here. I say you give him a vet, maybe a vet who's had a little bit of a slide here. Let's look here. Wow, it's interesting. They have Mark Cherico on the UFC thing, on the UFC roster, but Mark was not signed to the UFC. It's interesting to see some of the names on here. I guess because of the Contender Series, they still count them on there. Maybe you give him I don't know, man. I'm just looking at this here. You don't give him a Chad Mendes, even though Mendes has had the layoff, because, Mendes is still damn good. You got to do a slow build here as far as that goes. This is the first time I've actually looked at the UFC featherweight division on their website, and they got a bunch of Contender Series guys on here. That's interesting. You know what? People might disagree with this, and maybe you kill a contender this way. Gavin Tucker, Canadian on Canadian violence. Let's do it. I'd be a fan of that fight. Tucker got, he took a beating in that last fight against Rick Glenn, and he had a good debut against Sam Sicilia. Let's see where they fit in the division. I think if Canada's not a priority for the UFC, which it certainly seems that way at this very moment I'm speaking, because there's no events this year. If Canada was a priority, we would have heard of an event at this point. Match them up. That'd be a fun fight. Duato loves to strike. Tucker likes to strike. Let's do that. I'm a big fan of that. Wow, they have Dennis Seaver still on the rankings here. Newsflash, Seaver fights in ACB now, so might want to change that there. UFC.com. Basically just a veteran. I know Tucker isn't really a veteran, but I think that's sort of an exciting fight. There's no veterans right now that really sort of stand out to me that say, let's do this. What do you guys think in the chat here? Someone obviously said something offensive because the message has been retracted or something. I don't know. I don't really know how this works. Yeah, I don't know what you do here. But the thing is, you got to build up Duato because he's still a prospect. He's 26. He's exciting. You're the UFC. You don't bury this kid because he had one bad fight. You give him a exciting matchup after this. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Hey, you know what? Maybe you give him a guy like Steven Peterson too. Another Contender Series guy. Peterson lost his debut. That's a fun fight. Veteran versus a prospect type thing. I'd say, even though Peterson's only had one fight in the UFC, he's still kind of a veteran. He's a little bit older. So maybe you throw him that way. I don't know. But either way, you give him the slow build. You don't throw him to the wolves for his next fight just because he had a bad debut. I think we'll see Hakeem back for sure. So that hopefully answered your question. John, we'll get to Evil Eddie. Evil Echo, you can follow him on Twitter, Evil Eddie. Evil Eddie does a show called Pure Evil MMA, which is on My MMA News, which is another site that I work for. Great guys over there. Go check out Eddie's show and follow Eddie on Twitter at Evil_Echo. He says, Nick Newell has been discussed for years. He recently returned and got a win in classic Newell fashion. What do you think is holding the UFC from signing him? He has one loss, and it was to Justin Gaethje. That says a lot. Is his medical issue with his hand a reason not to sign? Nick Newell is going to be in the UFC. Mark my words on that. First off, I don't even think the ink's dry on him potentially signing with the UFC because, he just fought, what was it, last Friday? Sorry, the Friday before. So people saying he's got to get signed right away. Usually it takes a bit to get signed. But he fought on March 9th. So, we're what? This Friday is going to be 2 weeks that he last fought. So I think he gets signed. And the reason I say he gets signed, he just signed, he first off is with Ali Abdelaziz at Dominance, and I don't think Ali's going to sign someone to get them to go and fight for, Bellator. I don't think Ali has any fighters in Bellator, to be honest. He's going to the UFC. That as soon as I saw that signing, as soon as I saw Nick Newell with signing with Ali, it just seems like a foregone conclusion because Ali has so many fighters in the UFC. And I think that's what we're going to see next. And actually, Newell is on the MMA Hour at the time we're recording this. And I wouldn't be surprised if he announces on there that he's with the UFC because why else would he go on just to talk about the win? Or maybe it's because he signed with Ali. I'm not sure. But And by the way, I'm not trying to go head to head with Ariel. It's just one of those, this was the only day I could do the Q&A. So not trying to build any competition here. Let's go back to the chat here for a second. Still nothing. Oh, actually, Lucas, my colleague over at Flow Combat, he has a question. He says, Lucas, by the way, is Lucas Grandsire at, you can follow him on Twitter at Grandsire MMA. He says, what do you think about the frequency of interviewing fighters? For example, do you like talking to the same fighter before and after every fight, or does there need to be a break? I don't really have sort of a set rule with that. I think that if the fighter has an impressive win or there's something notable about that fight, I don't mind doing a post-fight interview. For example, like Charles Byrd, who won this past weekend at UFC London. I'm going to probably hit him up this week for an interview if I can. I know he fought in London, so he might need some time off, but he had a pretty impressive win. I thought that was a little bit out of the blue. And Charles Byrd's not going to be on the MMA Hour. That's just the reality. He's an undercard guy, so I wouldn't mind sort of, I kind of like to find, when it comes to post-fight interviews, I like to get fighters that probably aren't going to be doing a lot of other interviews, and that way it's unique content. And kind of just on that same note of asking, the frequency of interviewing fighters. It just sort of depends on the situation. There's a few fighters that I will usually interview them before and after their fight, just because I like talking to them, or I think they're a rising prospect. In Flow Combat, for example, Devante Smith, who just came off a big win over Justin Edwards. I interview him pre and post because I think Devante is going to be in the UFC one day. I really do. So it's kind of good to build that relationship, build that rapport. And I think Devante's got a good personality. He's a good interview. I like talking to him. So I'll give him the time of day. And for Flo, we've aired a lot of his fights, so it kind of goes hand in hand that way. So, people might say that's bias, but I think it's just following a guy along in his career, get as many interviews as you can. So, when they go to the UFC, then you have sort of an archive that people can check out. Because let's be honest, other than like Contender Series or The Ultimate Fighter, there's not a lot of publicity of guys that get signed to the UFC. Eric Anders is a great example. I interviewed Eric after his second pro fight, and I think I've interviewed him every fight after that, leading up to the UFC and in the UFC. And, a lot of times people can go back and look at those old interviews of Eric, on his rise, because Eric wasn't on the MMA Hour. And, I'm not, by the way, saying this, I'm not faulting the MMA Hour. They're going to get, the big names. They're going to get the Conor McGregors and Daniel Cormiers and everyone else, because they want to get the best guests, the top name fighters. But that's where I come in. I'll interview the guys that aren't maybe getting those interviews, and I'm happy to do it because there's a lot of really good fighters out there, and I'm happy to speak with them and give them the exposure and everything. While we're doing this, I'm going to hit retweet on here, so see if we get more people asking questions and everything else. So it's let's see what else we got going here questions wise. Keep the questions coming, guys, in the YouTube chat. I'm more than happy to sort of talk about that. We do have about 25 minutes left in the show. I'm still trying to figure this show out. Like I said, I want to make it casual. I want to make it interactive. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions you guys have. I want to make this informative. I don't want to make this about, hey, this is the James Lynch Hour. This is what I'm doing, blah, 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 So talk about that. While we're waiting for some more questions, got to give some plugs to, a lot of good fights that happened this past weekend, along with the UFC, obviously. We had TKO on Friday night. I'm always happy to promote some Canadian MMA, some big wins there. We've got Brendan Kornberger, who is a up-and-coming, well, I shouldn't say up-and-coming. Brendan has been on the Canadian scene for a while, but he got a win. He made his TKO debut, and he's been featured a lot here on MMA Sucka because he's a local BC guy. And I should preface as well, I'm actually originally from British Columbia, so that's why Jeremy and I get along so well. He's a Canucks fan like myself, so he can enjoy the suffering this season like I am. But Brendan Kornberger improves to 9-3. He gets a second-round submission in his TKO debut. A guy that's on the cusp of the UFC, in my opinion. If they're looking for a middleweight and they have a show in Canada, I think Brendan's a guy who's going to get a phone call. We had Malcolm Gordon, who won by first-round submission over Jordan Graham. He captures the vacant flyweight title for TKO. Again, Malcolm, a rising up-and-comer, holds a win over UFC veteran Chris Kalades. He's a good guy, good fighter, could be on the UFC's radar fairly soon. We had Charles Jourdain, who is coming bounced back from his the first loss of his career against TJ Laramie. He knocked out Matar Lowe, which is a really impressive win there. He got the first-round finish in that one. And then TJ Laramie, main event. This kid's 20 years old, guys, and he went out there and he finished Wow Nogueira in the 5th round in his fight. And TJ, again, just better every fight. This kid is unreal. I can't say enough good things about him as far as the rise of him and everything else. And keep an eye on him. He's an up and comer as well. Cody Stamen uses him a lot in his training camps at Michigan Top Team. So keep an eye out for that. And actually, if you guys go over to tsn.ca, Aaron Bronstetter is doing a piece on Canadian prospects, and I gave TJ a little shout out in there. So TJ Laramie is a guy that you want to keep tabs on. A lot of really good Canadians right now. Got to give a shout out to the Canadians there. What else can we sort of talk about? We've got a bit of a break here in between. Obviously, the UFC London card and UFC 223 that's coming up here. I don't mind the break. I like it. I'm actually going away this weekend to Montreal to go watch the Montreal Canadiens play. So I'm happy to get a little break and not have to do any work this weekend too. I'll be just enjoying all that is Montreal. I love Montreal, one of my favorite cities. So we got a bit of a break here, but I got to say this was smart on the UFC's part because this is a huge card, UFC 223. And I like to see the anticipation for a card. And I think Khabib and Tony Ferguson might be one of the best lightweight fights we're ever going to see. Hopefully it happens. Don't want to jinx anything, but it's a great fight. I honestly can't wait. I don't know who wins that fight. I know Khabib looked amazing against Edson Barbosa in his last fight, and he absolutely should be the favorite heading into this. But Tony Ferguson, he's the interim champ. He finished Kevin Lee, which is impressive. He's unorthodox. Is Khabib going to be able to handle an orthodox guy like that? I don't know. We'll see. So, be on the lookout for my MMA Pros Picks video up on Fightful. A lot of interesting opinions on that fight as far as, who's going to come there. But we can go top to bottom on this card because, the next time I'm on this show, I won't be talking about it. So, we can kind of go through the card a little bit. Mike Rodriguez making his debut. Love that guy. Contender Series alum. One of Joe Lozon's main teammates. We got Zabit Magomed Sherperov. I know I butchered that. That guy's the real deal. He's fighting Kyle Bochniak. Props to Kyle for taking that fight. Zabit's legit. You've got the greatest of all time, Artem Lobov, fighting on the card against Alex Caceres. You got Ashley Evans Smith and Beck Rawlings fighting each other. Ashley Evans Smith hates Beck Rawlings. Go check out my interview on Fightful with her. She's not a fan. There's a lot at stake in this fight, which is at flyweight, actually. Brandon Moreno, Ray Borg. That's going to be a great fight in the flyweight division. Felice Herrig, Karolina Kovalkiewicz. Another good fight. This is a stacked card. This has to be the best card the UFC's put on this year so far. I know that isn't saying much because we're not even midway through the year, but I can't wait. There's a lot of fights I don't know what's going to happen. Ally Quinta, Paul Felder. Another good fight. Gosh, who takes that one? I have no idea. Michael Chiesa, back in business, taking on Anthony Pettis. You've got Calvin Kattar on the main card. Man, Calvin might be the most underrated 45er right now. He's beating everyone. He just beat Shane Burgos. Great fight. Rose Namajunas, of course, the rematch against Joanna. I can't wait for that one. Interesting Pros Picks reaction on that one. Go look for that video on Fightful. A lot of fighters picking Rose, rightfully so, but Joanna, it's interesting. Joanna, I should say, was that a fluke? Was she just unprepared? Did she have a bad chin? We're going to find out in the rematch. Can't wait. And then, of course, the main event. It's going to be an awesome card. And I should mention, I did mention, I should say earlier, I'm going to be there covering the card live. And I got to tell you a situation that happened to me. You guys might find this interesting. I was going to go to this, cover this event under Fightful. I covered UFC 218 for Fightful, and it's good. And Fightful and I do a lot of content for Fightful, so it made sense for me to cover it for them. And when I initially applied, they said, even when I applied for UFC 218, the UFC told me, we're going to take this as an event per event type basis, because I don't know if it's that they don't recognize Fightful as like a legitimate outlet, because, people listening right now that are like, what's Fightful? Fightful is, maybe not huge in the MMA community, but they're a huge wrestling website. They do MMA and pro wrestling. And, I've seen their numbers. They get really good views. They're a really solid site as far as the numbers go. But for whatever reason, ever since I told the UFC I was going to, because initially I used to always go under Sportsnet, which is a huge Canadian network here in Canada. I would always go under them, always get approved because they're a huge network. So I went under Fightful for 218. They approved me. I did a bunch of work. If you guys saw the interviews I did about 17 interviews for that event. No joke. I literally, boom, boom, boom. After media day is over, I'm trying to find other fighters at the hotel, trying to get as much content as I can. I really put my pedal to the metal for that event. Anyways, fast forward to now, I get in touch with the UFC about covering it for Fightful, and they tell me wait until closer to the date because this is a big card. I guess they want to see what outlets have applied, and then they'll make the decision if I get approved through Fightful or not. So I emailed the UFC today, and they deny me. under Fightful. Now, I'm still going to cover the event. I'm applying under Flow Combat, who I do a lot of work for as well. And I'm happy to rep Flow Combat. I covered Bellator NYC for them last year, and it's I love Flow. They're great, great team over there. Hunter Homestek and I will actually be there covering the event. So I applied under Flow initially because I knew I'd get approved. But obviously, because I do more work for Fightful, I thought, I'll go under them, and I can be my own person because I'll be the only guy there from Fightful. But no, I got denied. So I will be going under Flow. I will be attending the event, but it will be, like I said, I'll be covering it for Flow instead of Fightful. So some politics there with the UFC. It's on sort of them and Fightful. I'm a freelancer, so I kind of just do what I got to do for myself. So I'm happy to do it for Flow, but I got a lot of cool ideas for some of the stuff I'm going to be doing down there as far as some of the interviews. I've already got a couple fighters lined up to do something a little bit different for an interview, so you guys want to stay tuned for that. And then also I have Hunter and I are probably going to be doing like a preview show or something. So a lot of cool goodies there. But let's go back to the chat because people obviously don't want to hear me rambling on. Lucas also says, what do you think about the frequency? Oh, no, that was the question he had before. We got VK in the chat asking, when you were getting started out, what did you find was the best way for getting interviews? Direct approach through Facebook, Twitter, or through manager or promotion? I cover this a bit in, actually, did I cover that in one of my videos? I'm trying to think if I did. I don't think I did. I did on a Q&A that I did on the industry podcast. I kind of addressed that already. No, maybe I did talk a little bit about this on the event video that I did. If you go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports, I do have a video on like covering events, and I kind of talk a little bit about, getting in touch with promoters. It's very similar to getting fighters. But to answer your question, when I started off, a lot of it was word of mouth. I would ask people that interviewed other fighters, how did they get in touch with them? So I would just ask around. That's sort of how I started off as far as getting my early interviews. But again, you guys have to remember, and I can't emphasize this advice enough. And I know on the industry podcast, when I had the Submission Radio guys, they kind of gave opposite advice. Their sort of theory is go big or go home. I think it's better personally if you're starting off to get, lower level guys, like get regional fighters and get UFC undercard fighters. If you want to get UFC fighters, that's fine, but don't go and try and get Max Holloway. I don't get that. Like if you're not, people are going to watch the interview with Max Holloway on the MMA Hour as opposed to your interview. That's just the truth. Even if you get Max Holloway, which is really tough, I can't even get Max Holloway. So if I can't get him, chances are if you're starting out, you're probably not going to get that as well. But to answer your question, yeah, I would go ask other people who have interviewed a specific fighter, go through that way. Second step is, and because they're usually they'll, if someone's interviewed them, they'll give you the name of a manager. It's always best to go through the manager or promoter or PR person first. That's my number one advice, because then you're doing it the professional way. Managers and PR people saying that can sometimes be a pain in the ass. I won't mention the manager, but right now I am on email number 11 with the manager trying to get a fighter booked. And I've tried to book this fighter. The fighter has a fight coming up in a few weeks. And I emailed this manager, literally as much as I could. And I wasn't being annoying about it. I was literally just like, hey, what's the latest? What's the latest? And they said, oh, don't worry, I'll get them for you. And it's been a cat and mouse game and through email. And sometimes it's a pain in the ass. And that sucks because it should be really easy. Some PR people, I message them right now. Hey, I'd like to interview such and such. Here's my availability. Boom, it's booked that day within a couple minutes, whatever. Other managers, PR people, it can be a bit difficult, but still the most professional thing you can do is go through the manager and promoter. Then if that doesn't work, then I'll go the Facebook route. And even Facebook, I'm not adding them to Facebook. I'm not posting on their wall. I'm trying to keep it professional behind closed doors. And I will message them on Facebook Messenger. And sometimes that message goes into the message request folder. So it's a bit of a gamble. Sometimes they don't see it, but that's what you got to do. You got to be professional. Don't go, some people disagree with this. Don't go on Twitter and post publicly and say, hey, can I get an interview with you? If the fighter has their DMs open, DM them. If they follow you, DM them, but don't do it in public. That's just my 2 cents, the things that I say or whatever. Lucas Grandsire also says, what has been your strategy when it comes to avoiding managers flaking on you for interviews? Well, if the manager flakes, then, sometimes I will go and try and go directly, because if the manager's not getting back to me, at least I have that excuse of saying, hey, look, I reached out to you. You didn't get back to me. I'd like to get this interview. A lot of us that are covering the sport, they're not trying to get a controversial interview out of a fighter, or they're not trying to get a clickbait interview. Most people are like me, where they just want to interview the fighter, ask them how they're doing, Maybe ask them what they're doing outside of fighting. Like, are they playing any video games, watching any Netflix, whatever? Those are the type of things that, we're here to just get good information out of the fighter. We're not here to screw the fighter over. So managers, if you're out there, make this easy on us. And I get that you don't want to bombard the fighter with interviews from a million different outlets, because really there are a million different outlets for MMA. Pick and choose, at least get back to the person and say, look, this person's not available. There's a couple managers. There's one manager in particular, not going to mention his name, but I respect the hell out of him. He's so easy to work with. He's one of my favorite managers to talk to. And he's denied me interviews before. And I'm okay with that, because at least he told me, hey, sorry, this person isn't available. They're doing selective interviews. That's fine. I'd rather get an answer than nothing, because that happens at times. Sorry, guys. I had my lunch before this, so sorry. I'm kind of not burping, but just getting a little bit in the way. Wasted Banana says, wish Maribek was fighting on that card. I do too. Maribek Taisimov got some visa issues. Don't know what's going on there. I'd like to see him back in the cage, because, man, what a talented guy that guy is in the lightweight division. It's too bad. I like that fight against Dunham. That was a good matchup. It's unfortunate that's going to happen. We got Remember the Name 8 saying, hey, James, my question is, how did you get to be so personable and friendly? Is it a born with thing, or did you develop it? It must help when talking to different people. When it comes to being personable with fighters, it's just, if people know me outside of my interviews, I'm kind of like how I am in my interviews as I am in person. And the personality stuff, being outgoing and things like that, it's sort of something you develop. I was a pretty shy kid when I was growing up, and it wasn't until maybe high school that I sort of broke out of my shell a little bit and started doing, public speaking and things like that. And that's sort of where I've always sort of been comfortable. And then sort of as I got older, it's a lot of conditioning. I was looking on my YouTube channel the other day, and I'm approaching almost 2,000 videos. Now, those are not all just interviews. Some of those are, just videos I've made, or they're podcasts I've done. Some of them are from events. It's weigh-in footage and stuff. But I've done a lot of interviews, well over 1,000. Probably, it probably is close to 2,000. It's not quite 2,000 yet, but it's getting up there. Because, guys, I've been doing the freelance thing since 2015. So it's been, a couple of years, and it's just consistently putting out interviews. So over time, you develop sort of a personality, you develop sort of things you like and you don't like. I still make a lot of mistakes. I'll be the first one to admit that, guys. I had a guy yesterday who's worked in the TV business. Give me some pointers. And, he's brutally honest. He said, there's a lot of bad habits I have when it comes to interviewing. And I don't really know the guy, but, he made a lot of good points. I'm totally cool with feedback as long as it's constructive. One of the things they said is that, I leave my mouth open when the guest's talking. It's just something I'm subconsciously not aware of. So that's something today when I was doing my interviews, I try to keep my mouth shut a little bit. Talking too fast. I get that one a lot. I talk fast outside of my interviews, so it's a little bit difficult at times. So these are habits I'm slowly trying to break, but again, conditioning is the biggest thing. And that's, again, going back to what the question before said about, how do you go about interviewing people? It's better to interview undercard guys or guys that are starting out, because if you do screw up, it's not such a big deal. If you're talking to, I don't know, Daniel Cormier, and you screw up, you're not going to look like as big of a moron, because that interview is going to get more eyeballs. People are going to see it, and they're going to be like, wow, this guy's an amateur, or this girl's an amateur. As opposed to if you interview someone on the local scene, it's like, oh, well, they're just starting out. It's not a big deal. I think when I first started doing interviews, the video ones sort of came after, but I remember the first event I ever did interviews with video stuff was Global Warriors here in Ontario. And, there's a couple of UFC fighters that were there actually just cornering people. Elias Theodoro being one of them. Darren Cruikshank was here. James Krause was actually here too. He's cornering Jason Witt, who was on that card. And this was back in 2015. But, you go watch those interviews. I wasn't very good. It sort of took some time to sort of hone my craft and sort of pick up some better habits. So that's sort of one thing as well. Let's go to Twitter here, see if we've got any comments here. And if we don't, guys, it's not a big deal. I didn't really promote this very well. I just told Jeremy I was going to do this on a Monday, and it sort of worked out that way. And this is sort of where we are right now. I'm going to check Facebook right now. Let's see if no questions on Facebook. Not a big deal. What else should we talk about here? We've got about 9 minutes left. I'll talk about some of the videos I put out on my channel. One of them is how to record my Skype interviews, because I get that question asked a lot. So if you guys want to go to youtube.com/Lynch on Sports, in there I have a playlist that's called podcasts /MMA industry /Fightful /everything else. I got to add this one too as well, the MMA Sucka podcast on there as well. But I'm making sort of videos that are informative, because I do get asked questions a lot, and I will gladly answer them, but I also get tired of answering the same questions. So I made a video. So if you go on my channel on YouTube, there's one that's on how to record split screen Skype interviews. That's one of them I have on there because that's a question I get asked a lot. And I think as people are slowly starting to notice, video's a thing, especially if you're a regional fighter. You're not getting a lot of TV exposure, so it's good to get your face out there. But let's look at some of the videos I've done. I did another one on how I edit my videos. A lot of people ask me how I edit. I had the benefit of when I went to school for broadcast journalism, for broadcast television, I should say, in college, I did editing. I learned how to edit on Final Cut. And once you know how to edit on one system, you can edit video on pretty much anything. Because now I use Adobe Premiere and I edit, really well. And if I didn't learn Final Cut, I wouldn't have been able to learn how to edit on Premiere. So I just sort of learned that on my own. And I go through in that video of how I edit my split screen interviews, like sort of the process of, after I've recorded the interview on Skype, how I go through and edit all that stuff. So check that out. That's on my YouTube channel. And then the other one I have, which I alluded to earlier, is the one to how to apply and cover UFC events as media. And that's sort of like a how-to of if you want to cover a UFC event, if you want to cover a local event, how you sort of go about that. I sort of talk about the politics involved. I talked about in this show of how I didn't get approved by Fightful, but I have a couple different outlets that I can go under for UFC credentials. Flow Combat's one of them, and Fanside and Sports Illustrated, I can go under them as well if I want to apply as UFC media. But I like to sort of stick with one outlet. But Flow, like I said, I'm so happy to cover it for them. I'm stoked, and that's going to be such a great card. Oh my God, Brooklyn. I arrived there Wednesday morning. I will be there the whole week, and I'm going to be doing stuff outside of the normal media day stuff as well. So I'll be getting a lot of good content. But yeah, that video just talks about that and also talks about some professionalism too. Like I do on certain events, see guys wearing t-shirts, guys or girls, acting unprofessional. I mean, drinking. You can't drink at an event if you're media. You can't take pictures with fighters as media. They're just like common sense things that should be talked about. So hopefully I get that as well. What do we got here? We've got some guy, full-time toilet cleaner. He says, James, what's up? Or you say, was up. I think you mean what's up. What's up, full-time toilet cleaner? That's an awesome name. Dick Eater, which maybe not the biggest fan of that name, but he says, who is your favorite fighter you've interviewed? Well, anyone who knows me well enough knows that my favorite fighter, and even before I started covering the sport, is Gegard Mousasi. And I've had the pleasure not only to interview him several times over the phone, but also in person. If you go on my channel, you'll see the interview I did last year with him at UFC 210 in Buffalo, his last fight in the UFC. And it was awesome. It was so cool. Like, I've been a Gegard Mousasi fan dating back to the Pride days, dating back to when he fought in Dream. I just always liked the guy, his personality, even before like he sort of started getting famous for like his interviews and being sort of brutally honest. I saw something in him back then, and I always thought his personality was different, and he's a great fighter too. So it's just been great to get to interview him a bunch of times. And, I don't have a problem saying he's my favorite fighter. And if I interview him again, I will be objective and say things like, I think people would argue that you lost that fight against Alexander Shlemenko. I thought he lost. I think he was lucky to win that fight, and he might tell me to F off, but I don't think he won that fight. So if I do interview him again, I will definitely, talk to him about that. But, it's better for Bellator that he won because they can give him the middleweight title shot, and he's a lot better of a middleweight champion. Personality-wise, let me be clear about that. Personality-wise, Gegard Mousasi is a better middleweight champion than Rafael Carvalho. It just is what it is. Carvalho doesn't speak English. If I went to the grocery store right now and I asked a bunch of people, who is Rafael Carvalho, nobody would have the answer to that. If I asked them about Gegard Mousasi, I maybe might get one person answering that too. But if I went to, a bar and people are watching the UFC, people would know who Mousasi is. They wouldn't know who Rafael Carvalho is. So I would definitely do that. Do we got any more questions in here? We got Stewie Motherfucker Griffin. The champ is here. Dude, this guy, I got to give him props. He always comments on my videos, says a lot of really nice things. So Stewie, thanks for joining me here. We got about 5 minutes left, guys. If you've got any last questions, get them in. I will definitely talk about that. Try and wrap these questions up here. Again, we say an hour. This could go longer than an hour if people want, if people have good questions. I'm really just here to be informative, guys. Like, I'm not a know-it-all. I've been doing this since 2008. I get a lot of questions, and I'm more than happy to do it on a platform like this. And again, big shout out to Jeremy Brand for giving me a platform to do this. I do a podcast, like I mentioned, on Fightful called the MMA Industry Podcast. It's on every Thursday. And that is specifically a podcast that I hope to be informative, where, we talk about niches in the sport. It's something that's not being covered. No one really talks about what it's like to cover the sport. And so I have different guests on to talk about that, whether they're journalists, whether they're managers, whether they're, people that are promoters or announcers. I had an announcer on a couple months ago, Cyrus, who does stuff for Fight Night Global. He's great. He was a really good interview. So that's good too. Like I said, guys, get your questions in here. Who's your favorite female fighter? I'll say I have a tie. I sort of always enjoy Randa Marcos. Randa, I interviewed before she was on The Ultimate Fighter. Actually, funny story about this. At the time, Randa was represented by someone else as far as her management went. And she had just fought in Canada. She won a title for, what promotion is it? It's going to escape my mind. They're based out of London, Ontario. What the heck? You know what? I got to look this up. Otherwise, I'm going to look like an idiot. Jamie Champion is the one who manages or who ran that promotion that Randa won the title in. But yeah, anyways, Randa has sort of always been one of my favorites because she was one of the first female fighters I ever interviewed. So I've sort of always had that spot in there. Provincial FC, PFC. That's the organization I was thinking of. Randa won their strawweight title in that. Actually, it's funny on Tapology here. They don't have. No, sorry. She fought for PFC on their first card. It was the second card that she beat Linnell House, and she won the vacant strawweight title on that. That was PFC 2. That was the fight before she was on The Ultimate Fighter. So Randa's one that I was kind of, I try not to be biased, but, I enjoy watching her fight. And I think that she's got an interesting personality, an interesting backstory. So she's someone, but also Cynthia Calvillo. Cynthia, I interviewed when she made her LFA debut. Sorry, no, I didn't interview her when she made her LFA debut. I interviewed her when she made her UFC debut. My mistake. And I think she's badass. I think she's awesome. And, anyone who says that she's overhyped, I think Cynthia earned it because she's got a cool personality. She's like a Diaz brother, and she's got a cool fighting style, in my opinion. So I enjoy watching both of them. So it's kind of like a tie. He says, who's your guest for the podcast Thursday? Well, Lucas, if you go to my Twitter feed, you can see it there. No, I'm joking. I'm just giving you a hard time. I've got Shamakar Sandhu actually coming on this Thursday. He's going to be recapping UFC London. He was just there covering the event. I've been trying to get Shamakar on for a while, and he does some work for MMA Junkie and MMA India. So you guys can check that out. I'll actually pin that tweet up after this show because I wanted people to see this one. We've got Talir1 asking, what did you do before MMA journalism? Well, I've always sort of been involved in journalism in one way or the other. So I went to school for broadcast television. I also went to school for communications. I have a degree as well. Before that, so I'll give you the Coles notes. We've only got about a minute left here. And if you guys have any more questions, get them in now so I can answer them before we wrap things up here. But so when I first started off, I've always worked in television. So when I got my degree and everything, I started off working as an intern at The Score, which is a now defunct network, or it was a network that used to exist here in Canada. It was a sports network 24/7. I started off as a scriptwriter. I actually worked on a show called Tim and Sid. Back in the day. Actually, no, it was called The Score Tonight, actually. My apologies. It's called Tim and Sid now, that show that I'm thinking of. So started doing that. I was a terrible script writer. I'm really bad at spelling and writing. And so I realized very early on that was not going to be my bread and butter. So I moved over to Fight Network, and I worked there in 2008. And I started off as an intern, and I started off editing. And thank God I got to hone my editing skills there because I use editing so much now in what I do. So I worked at Fight Network. I've always kind of been involved in sports television. So I did that for years, worked at Fight Network for 4 years, moved my way up to being a producer and an editor, senior editor there, and also did a bit of reporting there. If you go on Fight Network's YouTube page and you go look at old Bellator highlights or certain UFC highlights, I voice those. So you can hear my whiny voice on those early highlights if you go look at some of the older Fight Network highlight packs that were there. So I was doing that, left Fight Network, went to TSN, which is like the ESPN in Canada, did that for a couple of years not a couple of years. I did that for like less than a year, like maybe half a year. I worked there as a digital content editor. Video editing was sort of what I did, was my bread and butter. Moved on to Discovery Channel, was an editor there in Canada. And then moved on to Rogers up until last October, where I was a digital video coordinator, where I managed digital content for a couple different television networks here in Canada that were all owned by Rogers. So I managed it's basically television episodes and live streaming. I worked with that type of content in my day job. And then when I became a dad in September, I quit that job and did this full time. And I haven't regretted it since. It's been awesome. And I'm my own boss now. So it's awesome. And we got one more question. This will be the last one I'll get here because we're already over time. He says, oh, you're actually reading this shit. I feel bad now. Ha 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 ha. Of course I am. Didn't you guys see the tweets? I'm going to be answering all these questions in the chat. So I really appreciate it. We're going to go to Twitter. Yeah, no questions here. Guys, I want to thank you so much for the questions. Seriously, I did a very lousy job of promoting this, and I am super happy that I got a bunch of different questions in here. So thanks so much for joining it here. Again, every month, I will be doing this here on MMA Sucka. Big thanks to Jeremy Brand for allowing me this platform. Maybe I'll be doing some more stuff for Sucka. We don't know. Jeremy and I are just going to sort of take this slow, take this steady. You know, the kids these days, they're all about the one night stands. You know, I'm going to take things steady, old fashioned with MMA Sucka. We're just going to, you know, see how this Q&A thing goes. Maybe it'll be a Q&A that happens, you know, more than once a month. We'll see how this goes. But I love doing this. I love interacting with all you guys. I'm more than happy to do it. Maybe we'll get some guests on here as far as people answering questions with me. I don't know. Give me feedback. If there's certain things that you guys like or don't like about the show, let me know. I'm open to suggestion. This is a people show. I want to just be as informative as possible. So whatever you guys think is best, that is awesome. You guys can follow me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports. That's LYNCH on Sports, all one word. Give me a follow. My DMs are open. I'm always open to talking about the industry or talking about MMA topics or whatever. I also do a podcast with Adam Martin called the Parting Shot Podcast. We do that usually every week, breaking down fights, recapping fights, whatever. That's an MMA Oddsbreaker. And of course, the MMA Industry Podcast every Thursday. We're back this Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time with Chamat Karsandu talking about his career and his work at UFC London. And I got a bunch of interviews. If you guys are looking for stuff to watch in between now and the next UFC, I've got a ton of UFC 223 interviews, both on Fightful and on Sports Illustrated MMA/Fansided. So check those out. And guys, this was a blast. Really appreciate the time today. We'll be back next month for another Q&A like this. If the demand is there, maybe I'll do one before. But in the meantime, thanks a lot, guys. Hope this was informative, and I will see you next time.